I guess this is the other thing I liked about when I first heard about marathons. You could just decide to do it.
My first marathon, I had never run more than 16 miles. I think that a lot of, like, my biggest tip is that anyone can kind of do a marathon.
I think the other part too is it is all relative to the training you put in the goal you want to accomplish. If you want to finish pain-free, that's one training.
Yeah, well, if you know how to do that, let me know. We are here, sunny California.
This is true.
Discussing the marathon.
All right, so first time marathon tips. Maybe
we kind of back up a little bit broader and talk about why are you running a marathon?
I like that. What was your first? Why did you start running?
Is
that two different topics?
Yeah, two different topics.
All right.
Started running because of, and we'll just briefly touch on it, and then we can move out of it. But I was lead singer in a reggae band in high school, dreadlocks down here.
I actually didn't know this.
Soul Mystic, in the house. And so Bob Marley was a big fan of mine, and still is, or I still am a big fan.
I was gonna say,
or he's a big fan of mine. Maybe.
You never know.
Yes. I was reading his biography, Catch Fire, and I can't remember what part of the story, but basically he would take his entourage and these disciplines and the stamina, and they were these 18-mile long runs around Kingston.
Bob Marley.
Yeah.
With
everything so I don't know if you know, but okay.
Right.
And I don't know if you know, but he's a very good soccer player. Like he would play with and Alan Skill Cole was one of his best friends who had played against Pele.
This is not the answer I was expecting.
Yeah. So they're athletes, and they were all about like living ital, which is like living pure. So they would finish these long runs and go to the fish market and get fresh fish and vegetables, and go back and make these elaborate feasts.
Okay.
All very fresh and ital foods. So anyway, that was an inspiration for me at 16, 17 years old. It's probably 16 actually. It's like if Bob Marley's doing it, then I'm doing it, because I do everything Bob Marley does. And I convinced some of my bandmates to like join me on some of them, but it stuck for me. Like the running thing stuck, and I'd run with my dog in the mountains of Colorado. It became a daily activity, and it wasn't until I was 26 that I ran my first marathon. So there was a 10-year phase where I had no GPS watch. I knew nothing about racing or anything competitive with running. It was 10 years of my life where I ran for the physical benefits of it.
And then what triggered you to do your first marathon?
A man by the name of Alberto Peruset, basically and he's a co-founder of the Melbourne Marathon with me. He had been running marathons. He was much older than me, my buddy. We were surfing mostly in these days in Malibu. And it was actually my buddy Dave McVitie who said, hey, I have a friend named Alberto who runs marathons, and we're going to run a marathon with them. And that was my first. It was basically like, we surf a lot, we run on the beach, but we've never run a marathon, bucket list type of thing. Like, we're young, badass dudes. We need to run a marathon.
Challenge.
So challenge. There it is. Challenge accepted. Did it. Check the box. Never need to do it again. Okay. I'm good. I was done.
Really, after the first one. What was the first marathon?
So I did San Diego, 2006. Okay. Yeah. And I was done. That was it. And then the next year, Alberto was like, amigo, we will run the marathon. You will love it. It's like, dang it. Okay, fine. I'll do it again. So I can be talked into really stupid shit. And I think, and I consider this now to be a value, like it's a value of mine. Like, allow yourself to be talked into stupid shit, because it'll open up stuff in your life. I think I've deliberately done it my whole life. Like it sounds uncomfortable or scary or maybe impossible, I'm in.
Because the only reason it's stupid is because you wouldn't just do it normally.
There's no way I'm doing it.
And then you do it, and then it opens up another world of stupid.
And I like that. I get excited by things that are like, this could, not that it's like going to kill us, but like things that are like punishing. Risky, punishing and or like dangerous. Like those things, I'm not probably going to do it on my own. Okay. Well, maybe nowadays I do, but there's things where you're only going to do it with your buddies. And in that time in my life, marathons was that thing. Like, I don't know what that is. I wouldn't do that. That sounds stupid. Why would I run for 26 miles, Yeah. And so that's what it took for me. And it took that for a number of years before it became like a thing for me.
Okay.
And somewhere around 2008 or 2009, it became a thing. And then I was running 12 a year.
So 3 years to get really competitive around it.
3 years to make it as something that I would do on my own. Okay. Regardless of like fast or anything like that. I mean, I was the fastest of my friend group when I was running. It meant nothing to me, and which I'm thankful for. Most of my foundation running had nothing to do with speed. It was all, health or adventure. It was the explore part of it more than it was any sort of performance.
Got it.
So,
okay.
Yeah. How about you?
So first marathon was during an Ironman. It's the first time I ran 26 miles.
Okay. So the marathon's easy for you then.
No, honestly. So I started, so yeah, the backstory of that. So I grew up swimming, went to college, did not do any sports, and then got out, and I was working for a company. One of their big charity initiatives was Best Buddies. And there was a bike ride from, they call it it's the Best Buddies Century Ride. I think it's called Best Buddies Hearst Castle. But you ride from Carmel down to the Hearst Castle. And there was a group in the marketing team that did it like every year. And I was like, this is fucking cool. Like I never rode a bike, but I'm like, wow, this just seems cool.
Yeah.
So I put in for it and I had to raise money, bought a bike and started riding. And I kind of got into it, but I only got into it because I was like, I just don't want to be in pain for the 100 miles. And so it wasn't like, oh, this is my ultimate. I literally just wanted to do this charity ride.
Yeah.
So I trained for it, did the ride. And then after that, I remember thinking like this is pretty cool. And charity rides aren't like races. Like you're stopping, eating food right. But it was still cool. It was still like, it was really fun. And so I started thinking about it. I'm like, wait, I grew up swimming. Now I can bike, not like great, but I had a bike. And I was like, all I need to do is learn how to run. I can start doing triathlons. So I talked to one of my buddies, Mike, who I actually taught how to swim in college. Wow. He had to swim he was a teacher and he had to pass a swim class. Never swam before. So I taught him how to swim in college and he got pretty good. And then, and he was starting to run a little bit. So I'm like, well, get a bike. You're running, I'll start running. And we started doing triathlons. So the first triathlon I did, I think was in 2010. In Las Vegas, and it was an Olympic. And it was one of those things like just no idea what I was doing. I had no idea that there was these special suits you had to wear that were like tri-suits, to swim and bike ride in. Yep. I learned I had no outlets. There was no Instagram wasn't a thing. There was you were just Googling stuff. Yeah. And then it became an addiction. So then it was like Olympic, another Olympic. And then it was like, I could probably do a half. And then so I did a half. Yeah. And then it was like, well, the next evolution is full.
It's a slippery slope.
It is very, very slippery. And then I did a full, and it was the craziest thing. But I never thought about, the weird thing is I never thought about running a marathon. I don't know why. I knew I had
training,
to.
like what did you run as your longest?
So the longest we would do, like training was gnarly because I didn't know what I was doing. And we were following like internet stuff. Yeah. And so
like Mark Allen.
It was so bad. So every weekend I was living in Vegas, I'd drive out to LA, meet with Mike, and we would do a long bike ride on Saturday. So we do anywhere from 60, 80 to 100 miles. Yep. And then every time you do a 30-minute run after it. Wow. And then on Sunday, I think it was like 12, 14, 16, 18, 20.
Wow.
And so that was like after beating yourself up on the bike. And I was horrible on the bike. I never got fitted well. So like the runs were always painful. Wow. So I think that's why I never was like, oh, I'm going to run a marathon. Yeah. Because every time I'd run long, I was like in full pain. Yeah. But yeah, I did Louisville was the triathlon. Wow. It's the first time I ran 26 miles was after riding the 112. So that was my first marathon.
What was your time?
So it was like 12 hours something. Nice. I got hit on the bike, mile 85. A girl next to me was going to pass and then passed out and literally blacked out, like full on dehydration, like blacked out, gnarly. Slammed into me. And I didn't know what had happened. So we had talked to someone after, but basically I got taken down. I put my hands down, my whole leg, everything just wrecked. I knew she blacked out because when she was locked, like our bikes were locked together, and she was still in her arrow position. Whoa! Never dropped her hands, anything.
I wonder if that protected her a little bit.
She was wrecked. She was wrecked. So anyways, I wrecked. Volunteers came over. A cop came over, and I remember thinking my hands were bloody, my knees were all bloody, and they were like, "We got to take you to a medic," and I'm like, "No," because that means I'm done. I was like, there's no way I'm going to a medic. And the cop was like, listen, they called the ambulance, and she was a mess. And I was like, do you have any gauze? And he went back to his car, got me gauze. I just wrapped everything up, and then I got back on my bike and kept going.
What mile on the bike?
That was like 85, and I was miserable. I was miserable.
Oh,
so I ran the marathon then. So anyways, that was my first one. And then never thought about doing it until Mikey's son was born. And about a year in, they found out he had Angelman. So Angelman is a very rare disorder, genetic disorder. And there's really only one charity that supports it. And they're based out of Chicago.
Wow.
And so their big fundraiser is the Chicago Marathon. So then that was our first marathon.
And what year was that?
That was probably, I'll have to look it up, but it was probably, if I had to guess, it was probably like 2016.
Yeah.
And that's when we ran with a flag the whole time.
Yeah.
So my first,
Wow.
first marathon was after in an Ironman. The second one was holding a flag for.
So speaking of slippery
6 months.
slopes, how many have you done now?
Not that many.
Yeah.
I've done Chicago 4 times now, and then the Ironman.
Yeah.
I don't think I've done another marathon. I've done a bunch of halves. So I sponsored Revel for a while.
Yeah.
So I'd just go out and do the Revel half.
I feel like I think once you've done more than like one, you run one and then it's like you either come back or you don't.
You know the pain.
Yeah.
And the training, I guess to me, the grass is not the grass is always greener. The nice part about a marathon was the single out. Like I trained an Ironman and it was miserable.
Yeah.
And it was so much of a time suck that training for a marathon didn't seem as, in comparison,
100%.
it didn't seem as much. It wasn't as much time.
Yeah.
And I kind of like that.
Yeah.
I also like that you could pop in and out.
Yeah.
If you had a marathon, there's points where I wouldn't run. And then 3 months before Chicago, I'd come back to it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. It's whereas like compared to Mark Allen, Dave Scott, 35, 36, 37 hours a week. Like just the way they trained is insane.
It was insane.
Yeah.
So
crazy.
So that was so from, I guess, we both kind of come at it from different standpoints. I think, do you think the majority of people doing their first, I guess this is the other thing I liked about when I first heard about marathons. You could just decide to do it.
Yeah.
Like we talked about before, there's not a huge investment, some shoes.
Yeah, you don't exactly.
And you can go out and
Exactly.
almost any human, because you've seen it with people, you've seen very overweight people, seen people with disabilities. Like there's almost running as a human function if you're capable. And I think that was the cool thing I found is like, there's people that want to do one marathon in their life.
Yeah.
And that's cool.
Yeah. And it's like, there's nothing like having elite athletes and people walking 26 miles come across the same finish line on the same day.
Correct.
It's pretty, and my buddies who I ran with were in the early years were just like 4:30, you know, and I was finishing in like low 3s.
Yeah.
And it was, so I'd take a nap on the pavement, you know, like for my first, I would say first 10 marathons, like I ran with them. And so I was always the fast guy of my 3 buddies. And I'd always just like kind of chill for an hour after they were done. And it was like, that was just our dynamic, you know, but it was like, they were always like, oh, you're so fast, you know? And to them, I was fast, but to me, it was just like, we're all out here doing the same thing. And, you know.
And I think the average time is around like that 4:40, something like that. Yeah. So that's like normal.
Yeah.
And then you were running obviously like more elite paces. So, so first marathon stories.
Yeah.
What is, if we were to summarize, so I actually got a text from my buddy the other day doing his first, I don't know if it was a full or a half, but he's one of those things. He's like, hey, doing my first, any advice? Yeah. And it's like such a blanket statement, but I feel like I was there too of like,
that's the cool thing.
What do I need to know?
I think the marathon, I think what we can provide that's unique is that we didn't come in at an elite level, you know, or a competitive level, even from just our approach. And I think if you're a collegiate runner, for example, and you're like, I want to run a marathon, you are such a runner. You're a collegiate runner. Like it's like all you're doing is just doing a longer distance. So like just do everything you've been doing. And then, so like my tips for a collegiate marathon or a collegiate runner becoming a marathoner, do what you've been doing and then just, you know, do a couple more long runs. My first marathon, I had never run more than probably 16 miles. Okay. And so I think that a lot of like my biggest tip is that it is sort of what you said, where anyone can kind of do a marathon, you know, unless you have like, you know, break your leg, maybe you're not going to make it, right? Yeah. But I feel like it's mind over matter. So like the biggest thing is like, don't worry too much about any of the details, because if you want to do it, you're going to do it. You're going to finish it.
For sure.
So I think that's number one, you know? And I mean, I proved it to myself with like, and I thought in my mind, I was like, okay, I've run it's been 2 to 3 months of us running 6 miles on the beach barefoot between surf sessions. And on the weekends, we go run Sycamore Canyon in Malibu. It's like anywhere from 13 to 15, maybe 16. It's only 10 more miles than that. Mm-hmm. That's like, okay, it's like the 16-mile long runs, and then you add 10. Okay, yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
Did not get it. It's not like that. It's so not like that.
Anyone who has run, because I remember thinking this, and I think the mentality carried over. My first half Ironman, I think the longest I'd ran was 7 miles.
Wow.
And then I had around a half marathon, right? So almost double.
Yeah.
And it was doable.
Yeah.
But there is something that happens past mile 16.
Yeah.
No matter what time, that it's not the same.
No, it's not the same.
You're in a different world.
But that being said, as gnarly as it is, which is why I love the marathon, it's still like you can do that. Like you could run only 16 miles and you can still finish the marathon.
But it's not the equivalent. It's not a multiple of what you did before. It's not equal.
No, it's definitely not equal. Yeah. And I think like the way I look at it now compared to the first time is, how much do I want race day to suck? Because the more you train, the better you train, the more specific you get for that distance, the better you feel, and the more fun it is. So
I think the other part too is the marathon is all relative to the training you put in the goal you want to accomplish. Yeah. Right. If you want to finish pain-free, that's one training.
Yeah. Well, if you know how to do that, let me know. Because pain-free after a marathon,
not 100% pain-free, but breaking down on the course, right? Yeah. Versus hitting a time, versus hitting a faster time, versus hitting a faster time. Yeah. So let's just say for the person who's, I bring it back. What would you say is a qualification to run a marathon? Do you recommend someone does a half before?
Well, I did, no. So, and I probably because I personally hadn't. I had never run any distance race other than a marathon before I ran a marathon. Okay. I trained 50 women as a part of the Nike Women's Marathon Project in I think 2019, somewhere around that time period. We took 50 women that were influencers, and some of them had never run at all. Some had run a mile. Some had run a marathon, and we took all of them, and every single one of them crossed finish line in a 15-week cycle. Right. And, I think this is different levels of, buy-in, commitment, discipline, like all of these different things, right? So that right there is just proof that it doesn't matter really who you are and how you're built. Like if you want to run the marathon, you can.
You can do it.
Yeah.
So let's say someone who hasn't run even a half marathon. Yeah. Let's start from the beginning. What's your list of these are the things you should focus on if you want to do this?
Now, I will say that the guy that got me into marathoning, Alberto Peruset, God rest his soul, he has the world record currently for the most ever barefoot marathons ever run. I was about to mention shoes, and then that popped into my head. Somewhere along the way of us running marathons, we had this friend named Todd Byers who was a barefoot guy. And if you run marathons long enough, you run into these guys who are out there. And I remember this one guy was on San Francisco Golden Gate Bridge, and I'm running, and I finally catch up to this guy with this crazy wild hair, wearing nothing but short shorts, and his chip around his ankle. And I'm like, dude, you're crazy, And he was my age. We were like, in his late 20s. He looks at me, he's like, you're crazy. And he was just dead serious. And I was like, that's awesome. He looked like some Scottish warrior, just running down on pavement, bare feet, at like a 2:40 marathon pace, amazing. And this guy, I'm forgetting his name, but he had run a number of 2:40 and I think maybe a couple sub 2:40 barefoot. Wow. So I bring that up because it's like you almost don't even need shoes, if you really, there's a lot of people that do that, right? Yeah. So, but like basic things, like the basic starting points, I think you're basically, the larger you can grow your workload capacity, like your body's ability to deal with work of some, like whether you're doing a walk run technique, if you're just running all the way through, like basically just building on your ability to just continue to output, energy and effort. That's the main thing. I think that's getting somebody out and
mental and physical.
Exactly.
Right. Because if you can't if you physically take on the workload, then it becomes mentally, can I keep this going? Yeah. If you already shut down mentally and say, I'm not capable of this, you're dead in the water.
Yeah. And we're going to have a whole podcast about this next statement, but there's a lot to be said for motion and action leads to more action, right? So if you, like we live in this world of Instagram, social media, all these things, like there's a lot of motivation, inspiration out there to the point where it's like, it can be a dopamine drain just to see all of these people doing all of these things. I think that if you think about putting one foot in front of the other as the inspiration. So before you even think about motivating yourself, just take a step and then take another step and then take another step.
And be your own motivation.
That's
first.
the motivation,
Yeah.
because what starts to happen with your chemistry when you start to get into motion, that becomes the powerful thing. Like that becomes the motivator for the rest of whatever your workout might be.
Yep.
And then you're now your own inspiration for, it's really just a belief thing. It's like the central governor saying, okay, you didn't die. We're going to let you do that again. So I think a lot of that is kind of what training is to me. It's like, you know, it's consistently going out there and applying yourself to effort. And, you know, the result is, you know, what it is.
I would, to add on one more thing to that, because this was the hardest thing for me, is if you're able to put all that out there and get yourself moving, but, and it's funny because social media can play a part in this, the accountability to me is probably the next biggest thing besides your capability of handling the work, because then it's, you can handle the work, but do you choose to do it again?
Right.
And what is holding you accountable to do that again and wake up every morning when you're like, can I skip this run?
Yeah.
Do I really want to do this?
How much of that do you think is community, or like, is it the same thing to you? Like
community,
accountability?
I think it's a blurry thing, right? For me, working with you is accountable.
Yeah.
Like I have a
someone
coach
else
who's putting together
telling
workouts.
you what should be coming down the pipeline.
Hugely accountable.
Yeah.
Before we were working together, having someone I was racing with, calling me up and saying, hey, just did my run.
Did you do the workout? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then to talk about social media, as much as like you can talk shit about it, I think if you go out and say, hey, I'm going to do this marathon.
Yeah.
And maybe even like make it good, raise money, like do something for charity.
Right.
Have a community around you who's not training with you, but is going to be like, oh, how's training going?
Yeah.
Oh, you got the marathon coming. Like that to me is, or else, because at the end of the day, you're paying to do this thing that you don't have to do.
Right.
It's not making you any money. No. It's not helping your survival. Right. Like, you could just say like the day before, I'm not going to do it. Yeah. So to me, the accountability is probably the next biggest aspect. Finding whatever that is. Yeah. Whether it's social media and basically pressuring yourself. Yeah. Finding someone to do it with is probably one of the easiest. Right. As long as they're just as motivated. Yeah. Or a coach.
Yeah. That sums it up. I think for me, training partners, if I look back at my most productive, I had a 10-year period where I was just running ridiculous amounts, and it was really the community. It was my training partners. These days, it's like I don't get out the door as much. Those days that I would have gotten out the door if I had somebody waiting for me.
Yeah, you know? For sure. So it's like going to the gym to meet a trainer or to meet a friend to work out. It's the same thing, or going to a class, right? Yeah.
But I love that you brought up social media in a positive light for that. I know somebody said it recently that that's how they use social media. So it's like literally I go on and I tweet and say 10-mile run today, and it's like now that it's out there, I can't say no. I'm gonna go do it.
Or what about a time? What about a time? Right? Like I used to put out my training runs, and then I'd be like, oh shit, I'm getting slower. Like and it's an ego thing, but it's like I got to push myself next time a little bit harder. You know? Okay, so motion, accountability, two and foundations.
Community.
Okay, shoes don't matter.
Shoes don't matter. We'll have a whole episode about shoes too, right?
I will say this one thing about shoes. Yeah. Feel good. Because if you don't feel good, I relate it to the bike and triathlon. Yeah. I never felt good. I fucking hate biking. Yeah. I never felt good on a bike. Yeah. So I don't enjoy it. So to me, it's like find something that feels good to run in. Yeah. To where you feel good getting up in the morning and going. Yeah. It's never gonna feel like clouds, you know, like all the shoes, and like I said, we'll talk more about it later, but I just think finding something that fits your foot that you feel good putting on every day. Yeah. That's it.
I mean, I worked for a specific brand for 7 years where I had to like hawk that brand. And then, by contract, and I've also run for different companies that sponsored me as an athlete. And I think to your point, I think finding something that fits the individual's foot, because I get that question so often, like, what's the best shoe? Like, what shoe should I wear? There is not an answer to that question because everybody's foot is a little bit different and their comfort is a little different. Your afferent feedback is
like nutrition.
Absolutely. So
I think
get comfortable.
Here's one other crazy thing. I've only run in one brand and model of shoe
really
since I started in triathlons.
No, really? That's phenomenal.
I'm on the I can say it. I'm not paid by them or anything.
Yeah.
Saucony Kinvaras.
Wow.
I've ran since they released number 1. And
wow.
now I'm in number 14, I think, or 15.
Wow.
Yeah. I've never ran in any other shoe.
To that point, I've run in that shoe. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I have been gifted Hokas. I've been gifted, I want to say like an A6 or something. And I just didn't enjoy it.
Yeah.
So I just kept going back.
I have run in basically every brand just to try them out. Like I'm highly experimental, and I will. Maybe that's a tip too. As a first time marathoner, like be experimental. It's especially with shoes. Like, but other like gear, shorts, short length. There's no like perfect short length. Like some people do like the boxers, briefs, the sewn in, like whatever. Everybody's got their thing. But with shoes, I used to go into back before super shoes, back before like marathon shoes. Actually, not before marathon shoes, but I would go into a shoe store and say, give me your 5K racing flat, because all the marathon shoes back in like before 2010, they were just heavy.
Monsters,
they were
right?
Monsters.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I want a 5K racing flat. And I'll run a marathon. Flexible. But I just wouldn't tell the guy in the shoe store that because then he would give me the wrong shoe for me. I wanted light. And it was the Kinvara. There was like a couple, like there's some A6 ones that I remember, the Mizuno. There was just a bunch of brands that I never. After about because I ran a little bit for cross country ski team in middle school, and that's the only time I wore Nikes. I never revisited that brand until I was 30 plus.
Got it.
But there were besides that, I probably went through every other brand. That I was sponsored by Newton for a while, and then Ultra when they first came out. But yeah, I don't think that there's I think the worst thing with a shoe is putting somebody on an unstable platform and basically and I think super shoes can do that. They can make you very unstable. They're very soft. They're high. And, and if you watch somebody stand in super shoes, they're all over the place.
Yeah, wonky.
I know we're going down that rabbit hole right now, but yeah. So I think minimal is great, because minimal in the way of keeping your body in its natural, position.
Feeling, strengthening your feet.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you could have, 10 millimeters or 30 millimeters under your foot. But if it's not shifting you too much or putting you up with a high heel, I think you're probably going to be okay.
Okay. So, all right. So that next technique. Yeah. Do you recommend working on technique before your first marathon, or do you think just getting it under your belt is important?
See, I didn't. And I didn't think too specific about mechanics or how my body was moving. I should take that back. As a first-time runner, as a teenager, I actually did perceive things of head position and arms and how I was swinging my arms. But it was a really horrible time in the 90s to be thinking that, because there was nothing. You couldn't even go to the library in Durango, Colorado and look up running mechanics. That did not exist. So I felt weird for thinking that. I was it's weird that I'm thinking about my arms. How insecure am I? Fast forward, I've done over 1,000, biomechanics analysis on people and changed the way their body moves. But I had run probably, I think about 40 something marathons before I had anybody tell me here's how you can do it.
So not even hugely important, but obviously beneficial if you want to make the investment.
That's one of those things where it's do what I say, not what I do. Yeah. I think, because now looking at it, if I have a first time athlete, I'm let's look at how you're moving, because we can give you things. It's if I look at myself as an athlete, the trajectory of progress can be expedited with all the athletes I work with. That's why I became a coach, because it's it took me so long to figure out the things that I ultimately learned
that you can pass on.
And it's so fun to coach, because you're look, let's just do these 5 things now, and your first marathon is going to be awesome, compared to 30 marathons later.
Okay.
So so mechanics, looking at how your body moves. It's you have your engine, and you have your, it's the race car, the aerodynamics, and it's the engine. You have 2 different components. So mechanics,
and the tires are the shoes.
Yeah, and tires are the shoes.
All right, so mechanics, and then getting into a training program. Obviously, we talked about accountability being important, but what is the advice for a first time? How much time, if someone's going from 0 to marathon, what would you recommend time-wise?
Yeah, interesting. I mean, the one thing that we know with the marathon that you have to do is accomplish X distance, right?